يا لغتي عربية حسبي بأنك منطقي وبياني عربية قلبي.
Another question which potentially will bring us into the metaphysic a little bit.
So you were saying you're going to do a thought experiment, so we've gone off track a little bit there.
Yeah, sorry, I apologize. I was going to say the thought experiment consisted of actually thinking about death, contemplating what people will do when you die. So actually living a third person kind of scene where you literally, your body's put into the grave and people are going away now. Your children are there. You know, your parents potentially are there as well. Some people are there as well. You know, they're leaving, you know. You're thinking about that whole process. And because human beings can't suffer for too long, they can't grieve for too long. So you imagine now your children or your parents, or whatever it may be, or your friends, after a few days they're thinking about it, they have to now suppress into the unconscious mind all of those grievances, and they forget about you.
I think, you know, as when I started this conversation, I asked you what the important things to talk about in this part, and you said religion, and we've been speaking for 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, we haven't mentioned religion once.
Well, that's what you think. You see what I mean? This is
from a non-religious point of view,
right.
This is something that we have to deal with every day.
Yes.
And religion doesn't come into that. But for you,
no, I agree in a sense. I agree with you that there are some themes in religion which are, as you can say, like if you had a Venn diagram, there would be not just religious, but either philosophical or something else, or sociological or psychological. But this is one of them. Death is a universal theme in a sense, because everyone has to come to terms with death, right? So I genuinely do believe that coming to terms with it, thinking about it, introducing it as part of your weekly or life, to go back to Heidegger, it will bring you back that sense of authenticity, grounding, right? Anchoring.
I think we all need to find meaning and purpose in our lives, and as a non-religious person, I think that's my duty to find meaning and purpose in my life. And you find it in a different manner than I do. But I think we're all
How are you doing? You okay? You good? Yeah, alhamdulillah, good to see you, man.
I think we're all trying to do what we all should be doing now.
Let me ask you a question. Do you believe in meaning with the capital M? Do you believe in actual meaning and purpose with the capital P? Or do you believe in a meaning, a subjective?
It's individual. For every individual on this planet, they have to find something that has meaning for themselves to get them through the end of their lives, to give themselves a fulfilled life.
But that's illusory. So it's not actually, from that perspective, there isn't an actual meaning, an actual purpose that anchors one to living a meaningful life.
If it serves the purpose of giving a fulfilled life, then whether you consider that to be real or unreal, it served its purpose.
So one could argue the same thing with religion, by the way, but not making that argument. Coming back to the more important philosophical argument, the question is this. I mean, I don't know what framework you kind of operate from, whether it be like evolutionary framework or an atheistic one.
I think human problems have human solutions.
Yeah. Well, I don't disagree with that. But the question is this. I mean, what role does metaphysical explanations, if any, have on your thought process? Do you ever think that potentially there is something beyond the physical world?
That's a long word, you know, that's not something that comes into my mind. Thinking about metaphysics, you know.
Why not?
It's not a word that I use every day or come across every day. So
but what I mean by that,
struggling to give you a definition of what is metaphysical.
So, what is metaphysical is that which is above and beyond the material world, which can be extrapolated from the five senses. That which is empirically verifiable, if you like. That when we talk about metaphysics, we're talking about that. So my point to you is that if we confine ourselves to the material, then we're going to have material solutions and problems. But if we expand to the metaphysical realm, then we can start talking about things like theology and philosophy even. So that's why I was going to say that, for example, what happens after death? That's a legitimate question. And what's your answer to that? And why is that? Give me your answer and tell me your reasoning behind it. Because when we talk about death, well, we didn't ask about what happens when you die and after you die.
Well, I don't consider that. I consider life and the end of life, but I just don't consider what happens beyond.
Why not?
I don't know why not. Actually, I think some people do, some people don't. I think it's a supreme arrogance of a certain section of humanity to think that we're going to live forever.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's natural.
Not everyone thinks that.
It goes back to what Heidegger's talking about in a sense, kind of suppressing that thought. But less because we've lived a life on this earth, right? And I believe one of the things that distinguishes human beings above and beyond all the animals is self-contemplation, introspection. So here, my question to you is, what do you think is going to happen? Most probably.
Well, my atoms will disperse and they'll get reused in some form, pushing up daisies or food for worms or plant food.
Yes.
That's what.
But you see, what you've explained is materially what will happen to your body, right?
And also in the memories of the people that I've met. And
yeah, which will also.
Then my memory will continue.
So about 100 years from now, if everyone's memories are wiped away, then nothing exists of you.
That's right. Yeah. Well, apart from the individual atoms, then they will have been used elsewhere.
My question is as follows. I mean, do you think that human beings are made of just material elements like carbon, or do you think that we're something more than just carbon?
Oh, we are. Yes, we're more than the sum of the parts. I mean, you could dry out those chemicals and put them on the table, and we're certainly more than that. Yes.
Because let me introduce you.
Any animal.
Let me introduce you to something. It's a debate in philosophy, right? There are three schools of thought, broadly speaking. There are materialists, also called physicalists. There are dualists, and there are idealists. So, materialists believe that everything that exists is basically material. That which you cannot empirically verify or justify, it doesn't exist, in a sense. Or it's meaningless. I wouldn't say it doesn't exist. They would say it's meaningless. It's a meaningless proposition. And there was a school of thought called logical positivism that flourished in the 1920s and 30s, which kind of pushed this materialist way of thinking.
You're losing me a bit here. No, this is going over my head.
Okay, I apologize. Let me try and break it down. Some people believe that all that exists is physical things. Some other people say no. Actually, what you have is physical things and other things, metaphysical things.
Experience.
It could be anything. For example, mathematics. A number can't be seen. It can't be smelt. It can't be dealt with. You can't put it under a microscope. It cannot go through the scientific method. And that's why, by the way, by the 40s and 50s, this, what you call logical positivism, became very weak. And in fact, they retracted. Those materialists and positivists, they kind of retracted this whole verification principle. They realized that things like this, mathematics, can't be justified. Now, why am I telling you this? The reason why I'm telling you this is because there's an age-old discussion. Are we minds and bodies, or are we just bodies? Because if we assume that we're just bodies, then when we die, necessarily what that means is that we're going to cease to exist. But if we accept that we are minds and bodies, like dualists, for example, would say, that we're not just bodies, that despite the body we have experience, for example, through dreams. Because when we're dreaming, we're not actually interacting with the extraneous variables. We're not interacting with the world. Yet we have a whole experience in a dream. You've had a dream before, right?
Yeah.
So the point is this, is that when we die, what's going to happen? If we say we're just bodies, it makes sense for us to say, okay, if we're just bodies, no problem, the body will cease to exist and nothing will happen. But if we are minds and bodies, which is the prevailing school of thought in philosophy, and by the way, most philosophers, the vast majority of philosophers believe in this, that we cannot just be bodies.
We're not just piles of chemicals.
We're not. We're more than that.
But that doesn't mean that we're going to be immortal in any way. What you were saying about the metaphysics.
No, it doesn't. Yeah, you're right. It doesn't necessitate that. Yeah.
Now, you were asking me about what I understand or what I think about metaphysics, but I would think about that slightly differently. So there are things that are sort of transcendent to our normal everyday life,
yes,
which we might experience through a symphony or a walk in the mountains.
Perfect. Yeah. So experience.
Yes. So
yes.
When you talk about metaphysics and a different level to this life, when I suppose that's the nearest equivalent that I could.
You're absolutely right about that. And that's exactly what philosophers cite. they say that first-person subjective experiences are examples of something which is not tangible or scientific, because for something to be scientific, it has to be third person. Science is in the third person. Third person is he, she. By the way, when we say first person, I'm talking about that which relates to me, I, right? Third person is he, she. So what do we mean by science is third person? Science is you doing something to something else and seeing the results of that. That's third person. Whereas what you've just described, I believe quite correctly, right? The orchestra, the symphony, whatever you want to say, the walking on the mountains, is first person. No one can deny your first person experience.
Yeah, you get moved by an experience that you can't quite explain. It's sort of transcendent in some way.
Exactly. Now the point is, when we dream, we're going through those experiences again. There are no material things around us in the actual dream. You could say they're mental constructs, but in what realm does that exist in? Does it exist? Right? Now, if we take this questioning to the post-death experience, because do you know what? I mean, we talked about science briefly. Science is just an accumulation of historical events and the assumption that history will repeat itself through patterns and laws. That's what science is. If we use that approach, we'll find that when we're sleeping, for example, we're leaving the conscious mind to the unconscious. So in other words, our consciousness is suspended temporarily, and then we'll come back to what we think is the real world, right? In that context, we could argue that we're having an experience which is a very real experience. Yeah? Now, if that's our experience of losing consciousness, death is an extension of losing consciousness. You will lose consciousness in death. If we accept that premise, how can we ascertain, or how can we say for certain that when we die, we're not going to go into that space again, that domain again, which is as real as this domain, which has all these things in it, which are sometimes traditionally called religious?
Well, you're comparing death to falling asleep.
Yes, I am, exactly. Yeah. That's exactly what the Prophet Muhammad said. He said one time, death is the sister of sleep, or sleep is the sister of death.
Well, I'm not sure where to go from here, because I don't consider that.
What happens when you die?
It's finished. There's only one level to this life.
How do you know?
I don't know. I can't prove it.
Yes.
And you can't prove it otherwise. So it's down to faith, isn't it? So,
yeah. So we have our respective faiths.
I think religions are a human construct to enable humanity to deal with.
That's fine. That's an assertion, but here we're talking about things which we can. Because the thing is, we have to think about how we reach conclusions, right? How do you come to conclusions? I'll put to you that everything you can put out there, which is supposedly certain, even your own existence, can be rigorously criticized. Anything, even your own existence. But what I will say to you is this: what we do as human beings, whether it be normally or not, is we apply a probabilistic reasoning. Probability. So we say, I'm probably here right now because everything signals to that. Yeah, it feels like that. So with everything, exactly. So we apply that kind of reasoning, right? Now what I'm saying to you is that if we apply the same reasoning, that same kind of inferential, sometimes it's called inferential reasoning, inferences, yeah, we can make a very similar case for life after death.
But we can't bring about the supernatural through logic. You know, it either is or it isn't. We can't prove it or otherwise. It can't bring it into existence.
What do you mean by the supernatural?
Well, a creator, or a god, or an afterlife.
Yeah. Well, in logic,
through logic, we can't bring these things into existence like certain words like abracadabra, and push, there it is.
Well, it depends on how you define logic, right? Because we can make a very clear case. For example, you've heard of the cosmological argument, yeah? Everything that begins to exist has a cause, yeah?
I've heard this.
The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Traditional argument, very logical. What is the cause? It must have power, it must have knowledge, it must have whatever. That cause is therefore God. Or whatever you want to define the cause as, it has the attributes of a conventional God, right? So from that, it's a logical deduction, and we've come to a conclusion that there's a cause, a creator, through that logical deduction. So it depends on what kind of logic you're talking about. If by logic you mean empiricism, looking at something through your five senses, yeah, I would agree with you, right? But if you're talking about deduction, it's different.
Through science or empiricism, we can't prove the existence or the absence of God.
But you can't prove the exact. Yeah, sorry.
Bring into existence a creator through logic.
Well, you can't prove the existence of logic through science.
So,
Do you see this point? Logical principles are metaphysical in nature. Axioms, mathematical axioms, and even the whole field of mathematics is metaphysical. There's no physical evidence of maths. None whatsoever. There's no physical evidence of logic. So logic itself can't be scientifically verified. And that's one of the reasons why verificationism, as is known by many different philosophers, was even they, like Ayer, for example, A.J. Ayer, he wrote a book called Language, Truth and Logic, yeah? And he was making a very similar argument to you. He wrote it in 1933. And this book, it was saying that only those things which you can see as that which you can verify is that which has meaning. Anything else is meaningless. And I saw an interview with him in 1976, and he categorically took back what he believed before. He said verificationism, what he called strong verificationism, is actually, it cannot be sustained. So it had to undergo through. Why? Because of these questions. Things like maths cannot be ascertained through science, through verificationism.
Okay, we're using very long words to describe it like a very simple, fundamental issue. Some people can live their lives in a meaningful life without need of religion. But there are other people who find solace in religion and find meaning and purpose in that way. And I still won't say which one's right or wrong, but there are different ways to find meaning and purpose.
Yeah, but I'll put to you that if you want to find a subjective purpose, it's easy to do. You can just make one up. And it can be unethical by the standards of the day. Hitler had a subjective purpose of life, and it was anti-Semitic. Everyone can find a subjective. Rapists can have a subjective purpose of life. Anyone can have that. But what we're saying is that, is there a meaning? Are we here for a reason? Or are we just...
I would say that someone like Hitler, if you look back on his life, philosophically, I don't think he would have said he enjoyed it. He had a good and happy...
to Hitler?
Yeah, I don't think he would have... if you don't do harm, it's a natural phenomenon. If you help someone across the road, you feel good about yourself in doing that. And he didn't do that, did he, Hitler?
Why do you think we feel so good about ourselves when we do these things? How can you explain that?
It helps. It's a part of social evolution. It's helped us survive as a species.
Well, I would argue
يا لغتي عربية حسبي بأنك منطقي